Bonjour French students, welcome to the third video for chapitre 1. So the first video, as you might have seen, was the culture video all about the south of France, la Côte d'Azur. The second video we talked about some ways of describing people. And in this third video we'll get a little bit more into grammar. So in French we would call that la grammaire. Okay, so as we can see at the top here, we're going to be talking about three different topics. The first one is les pronoms sujets. And what that means, or what it refers to, is subject pronouns. And some of you may have a lot of experience learning grammar in English, let's say, or other languages. You might not have a lot of experience learning grammar, but to be able to learn any language successfully, you've got to learn a little bit of terminology that goes along with that. It just kind of helps you sort different words into different categories and know how words work together in a sentence. And it actually really helps you with your own language. One of the things I've found from studying French grammar or grammar in other languages is that it really helps me understand English better, which is really helpful because, hey, it's my native language. Why not understand that better? So a subject pronoun would be all these pronouns you see in this chart down here. Like, let's see if we can draw a little bit. That actually might help us out. Okay, so I, you, he or it, she or it, we, you, they, and they. So those are all subject pronouns, and all that means is that they show up in the first part of a sentence. So, I am Madame Rojas. I refers to me. It's a replacement for referring to me by name. So that's all pronouns are doing. They're just basically substituting for a noun, taking the place of a noun in case we don't want to repeat that noun a bunch of times. So looking at this chart that we see here, this is the first time that you're going to be conjugating a verb in French. And all that means is that you're taking a verb and you're kind of changing the form according to who is speaking or who we're talking about. And we're going to be doing that with le verbe être. Okay, être is the equivalent of to be in English. The verb to be in English is foundational. We use it all the time, every day. I am, you are, he is, they are, etc. So without that verb to be, we just couldn't express a lot of actions. It's really, really central to our language. The same with French. The verb être is very, very important. It's just exactly the same as the verb to be in English. And the other concept we'll also be looking at here is la négation et quelques adjectifs. So negation, so taking a verb like être and making it negative, and then some adjectives. Okay, so as it tells us here, we see the subject pronouns and the verb or different forms of the verb être. Okay, and it might sound a little bit hard to pronounce this verb, right? Because you've got that R in there, that kind of tricky little R that sometimes throws us off as English speakers because the R is so different from the English R. Hey, R in English is like but the French R is more like gargling something in your throat. So it's être, être, être. And as it tells us here, the word être is in the infinitive. That's another grammatical term, and all that means is it's the simplest form of the verb. We haven't done anything to it yet. We haven't said I or you or he or she or they or we. It's just, it means to be, okay? So we haven't altered it yet. So once we do conjugate it or change forms according to who is talking or who we're talking about, then we'll see different forms of être. Okay, so you're already familiar with je suis, right? So suis is just the form of être that goes with je, I am. Okay, tu, remember that good U sound that we practiced in an earlier video for chapitre préliminaire. You got to round those lips as tightly as you can. Tu es. Okay, so est is the form of être that goes with tu. Okay, il est Elle est. The pronunciation is exactly the same. The T is silent, but you do have to spell it differently. So il est, he is or it is. Elle est, she is or it is. The form of être that goes with nous, which is we, that's nous sommes, nous sommes. Okay, and in the case of some, we're not pronouncing the last three letters. They're silent. Okay, so that's a good thing to keep in mind. Then we have vous, which is either the formal form of you, or it's referring to a group of people. And this one would be vous êtes. Vous êtes. Notice that there's a liaison between the S and the E with the little circumflex accent on top. Vous êtes. Okay, so that's you are. And then finally we have ils sont. So ils, which means they, that has a silent S at the end. And then elle also has a silent S at the end, and that is a group of females. So elles sont. Okay, so you've already learned about your first verb conjugation in French, so we're well on our way now. All right, so moving on. Let's see if it's going to let me do that. Oh, we'll minimize it. And all right, there we go. That's the slide we needed. Okay, so I think this slide that we see here is kind of a review of what I've taught you in some previous videos, but it's good to review it. So remember that in French, when we address somebody as you, we've got to use one form or another form. So if you're speaking to somebody you know well, maybe a friend, a family member, someone who's close to you, you're going to use tu. So tu es, you are. If you're speaking to somebody with whom you have a formal relationship, maybe your boss or your professor or someone like that, then you're going to use vous, vous êtes. Okay, so that's just a review from something we've learned before, when you learned some basic dialogues in the beginning of the course. Okay, il and elle, we already saw, were subject pronouns for either a group of males or a mixed group. So ils sont can refer to a group of all males or maybe males and females together in one group. Elle is for a group of all females. So ils sont, elles sont. And then je and other one-syllable words ending in e, like ne, le, you replace the e with an apostrophe before another word that begins with a vowel or a silent h, and that's called elision. And the best way to demonstrate that to you, I'll just get out of the display view for a minute. You have all seen this in various sentences. J'habite à Greenwood. Many of you wrote that on your exam. In fact, we saw that on the exam for chapitre préliminaire. J'habite à Greenwood. You notice that we don't say je habite à Greenwood. Okay, because the and the silent h kind of cancel each other out, there's no reason for us to write both of them. So it ends up getting combined like into a contraction. Or let's say la université. Okay, we don't need to have this vowel here either because U is already a vowel sound, so we just do an apostrophe instead. Okay, so good to make that clear. All right, so we've covered tu and vous. We know what il and elle refers to, who je refers to, and that would be I. Okay, and we've already learned about negation too, but it's good to review that. So anytime you're negating or making a conjugated verb the opposite meaning, like not, we're going to use ne and pas. Okay, so if I say je suis contente, I am happy, I can also say je ne suis pas contente, I am not happy. Okay, and we can see that with the verb être, je ne suis pas. Okay, so notice the ne and the pas. Je suis or je ne suis pas. And notice also how I kind of combine these. to form almost one word. So instead of saying je ne suis pas, most French speakers kind of squish those together and they just say je ne suis pas. Okay, tu n'es pas. Okay, so again we have the ne and the pas, but because the ne has an E in it and the next word begins with a vowel sound, they get squished together in a contraction. Tu n'es pas. Okay, when we go on to the next one, il n'est pas or elle n'est pas. Again, because the E at the end of ne and the vowel sound in the next word, that form of être, they get squished together and it forms like a contraction. Okay, it's easy to see here with nous ne sommes pas. But again, probably most French speakers are going to join these to kind of form one word, and they might say nous ne sommes pas, okay, when they're speaking quickly. Okay, so vous êtes, we saw, was the form that goes with vous, and again, we're going to take that E off of ne when we combine it with the verb that starts with a vowel right after it. Vous n'êtes pas. And finally, we have il and elle in the plural form, and that becomes ils ne sont pas, elles ne sont pas. Okay, so we know all the forms of être, and now we know how to make them negative, right? All right. Whoops. All right, let me escape out of here for just a second. It's going kind of crazy on me whenever I use that drawing tool. All right, so then we come to some adjectives. So quelques adjectifs. And you may already realize in French that adjective forms are different depending on whether they describe a male or a female, and if they describe one person or more than one. So you'll notice the different forms that we have of different words here. So we have adjectives like petit, which means small, extraverti, which means like outgoing or extroverted, jeune, which means young, marié, which means married, and finally français, which of course means French. So we're describing a person who's French. And so this kind of shows you all the different forms that adjectives can take depending on who they're describing. In English, we don't have to worry about this, right? We don't change any of our adjectives depending on whether someone is male or female. We don't change them depending on if there's one or more than one. That just happens to be a characteristic of English. There are other things in English that are definitely hard and complicated to learn, but in this area we don't have to worry too much. It's pretty simple. But in French we do have to remember these different endings. So if we're talking about a group of males, we'll say petit with an S on the end, but we don't change the pronunciation, just the spelling. Extraverti, same pronunciation as the singular, but we just add an S to the end. And you get that it's plural based on the context. If we're referring to a group of males, we'll still know that they're plural even if we don't pronounce that S. Okay, jeune, the same. The S is silent on the end. Marié, français. So for masculine plural, taking that from masculine singular, the pronunciation is exactly the same. The only thing that changes is the spelling. Now when we get to feminine singular, petit becomes petite. Okay, so kind of to show the difference here, petit becomes petite. And in the plural, it sounds exactly the same. Petite, we're just adding an S to the end. Extraverti becomes extraverti, and it sounds exactly the same, actually. There's no change in the singular or plural. So you'll notice that S's on the ends of words don't often change things very much, and they're usually silent in French. Okay, jeune stays the same all the way through. No matter whether we're talking about masculine singular plural, feminine singular plural, they all sound the same. It's their spelling that changes. So it's marié, 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 et marié, exactly the same. However, with français, this one stays the same in singular and plural for masculine, but in feminine it becomes française. and the S on the end doesn't change the pronunciation either. So I would just keep in mind that when you're adding an S to most adjectives, you're probably not going to say it differently, but it matters for spelling, it matters for grammar. Okay. All right, so moving on to our last slide. Some other adjectives that we should pay attention to. They're maybe a little bit more irregular, I guess. Gros in masculine singular, in plural is exactly the same, gros, but feminine it becomes gros. And gros just means something large, a large size of something. So we have gros and gros. Okay, gentil means nice. When we add an S to the end, it doesn't change the pronunciation. And in feminine, singular, and plural, it's exactly the same pronunciation too. We're just changing the spelling. So gentil, gentille. Okay, and finally, with this nationality name, Canadien. Okay, and just to be aware that the EN at the end of Canadien is a nasal sound. So Canadien, Canadien. Okay, and this one sounds exactly the same in masculine, singular, and plural. Just add an S to the end. And then in feminine, singular, and plural, it becomes Canadienne, Canadienne, and we just add an S to the end. So just to summarize everything, we learned about les pronoms sujets, so I, you, he, she, we, they. We learned the French forms for those. And those are basically who is doing the action in the sentence. It comes right before a verb. And the form of the verb that comes after that subject pronoun depends on what the subject pronoun is. The same way in English. Okay, so if I have a sentence like Je suis contente, okay, I am happy. So I've got my subject pronoun, I've got my verb, and the adjective to describe how I feel. Okay, we learned all about le verbe être, the verb to be in French, and it's the foundational verb for everything else that you're going to learn in the language. When you learn other verb tenses later on, we need the verb être to be able to form those. So it's kind of like in a math class, you learn some basic concepts, and those basic concepts take you on to more advanced ones. We're doing the same thing here in French. We learned about negation, so adding ne and pas before and after a verb to make it negative, and also realizing that sometimes ne, the E gets replaced by an apostrophe when it comes before a verb beginning with a vowel sound, which happens a lot with the verb être, right? And then finally, adjectif. We know that adjectives or describing words can change form based on whether we're talking about males or females. And sometimes the pronunciation changes, sometimes it doesn't, but the spelling generally almost always changes. So those are the main concepts to be aware of for the grammar part of this section of the chapter. So I'll leave you with all that to study and enjoy, and I'll be back with several more videos next week. À bientôt! Bonne nuit!